Welcome to Grappling with Gray, a forum for promoting an ethical mindset and ethical decision-making to help us more clearly see both sides of complex issues and better navigate the moral challenges of everyday life. I'm Rabbi Yonason Goldson, and I'd like to welcome my guests for today. Jane Adshead Grant is a master's certified coach, leadership facilitator, author, speaker, and faculty member of Time to Think Ltd. Dr. Nora Gold is a prize-winning author, the publisher and editor-in-chief of JewishFiction.net, an online literary journal, and former professor of social work. And Dr. Robin Odegaard is a concierge high-performance psychologist who works with successful individuals who have hit a bump in the road in one area of their life. She helps keep the chaos of that bump from spreading to the rest of their lives. Thank you, ladies, for being with me today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And here's today's challenge. It's a true story. After 11 years working as an office manager for a medium-sized company, Charlene found a position with another company offering a higher salary and improved benefits. Her future employer wanted her to start in 2 weeks, but her current contract required her to give 4 weeks' notice. She went to her employer, explained the situation, and asked to be released from the 4-week notice restriction. Her employer flatly refused. When she explained that the job might not be available to her if she did not start in 2 weeks, her employer said that if she left her position early, she would be placed on a no-rehire list, she would not be paid for her remaining paid time off, and she would receive no end-of-the-year bonus. It was mid-December. The next Friday was payday. Charlene waited until her paycheck cleared, then stopped coming to work. She never called in or let anyone know about her absence, leaving her former colleagues scrambling to cover her responsibilities. No one ever heard from her after that in the office. So here's our question. Where did the problems actually begin? And how might the situation have been prevented from blossoming to produce this result? The floor is open.
I can start if you like.
Please do.
Yeah. Well, speaking as a writer, I've looked at this case as a story. There are a lot of gaps and missing information. For instance, in a way, the source of this whole problem is Charlene's assumption that her new job is in jeopardy unless she starts it in 2 weeks. This is what she tells her current employer to persuade this person to let her leave the job sooner than the usual 4 weeks. Now, she could have said this as a lie, actually knowing that the new job wasn't really at risk. We don't know what she really believes, which is another crucial gap in the story. But for the moment, we can give her benefit of the doubt. So one possible starting point of the problem could be Charlene's possibly mistaken assumption, which she never checks out. Another starting point could be the current employer's refusal to let her leave after 2 weeks. And this refusal is quite surprising, I thought, given that she's worked there for 11 years. And specifically, I would say this employer's threats could be seen as what started the escalation because they were very inappropriate. If this employer had just said that Charlene couldn't get her end of year bonus because the company policy said you have to be in the company at the end of the year to get the bonus, that would have been legitimate. But the items of no rehire and not being paid for remaining time off are really problematic. And I think if Charlene had sought advice from a labor lawyer, even if her contract said she should have been given 4 weeks notice, I think she would likely have won her case because the company was being so punitive. A third idea I had was that the starting point could go further back to the relationship that Charlene already had with her current employer when she made this request. And maybe they'd had problems in the past that are coming into play in this situation. And of course, we don't know anything about their past relationship, which is more missing data and probably, I think, not completely irrelevant. Lastly, I thought we could go even further back and say that what happened here with Charlene may actually have begun in the belief systems she brought to the job 11 years ago, or even before that to her upbringing where she acquired these beliefs. For instance, the belief that ethics don't matter, that the end justifies the means as long as you get what you want, or her beliefs about authority, that there's nothing you can do, you're helpless if you're faced with a refusing authority figure. To me, it's very striking that she doesn't even try to negotiate for what she wants. She doesn't approach the possible resources in the system. After she's refused something just on a first try, she just gives up. And to me, that indicates a certain lack of tenacity, self-assertiveness, maybe a fear of conflict, and a certain weakness of character, because ultimately it's her internal decision how to respond to the situation. And what she elects to do, instead of fighting for what she wants in an appropriate way, is to do something passive-aggressive and unethical, and not only unethical, because actually, if for the final 2 weeks in the month, she's pretending to still be at the previous company in order to receive the end of year bonus, well, actually, she was already working in the new company, then what she did wasn't just an ethical violation, but a legal one, because that's theft. So those are a few options for starting points that.
Giving us a lot to think about, Nora.
Well,
Jane or Robin?
So I think I'm concerned about labeling her as being not having tenacity, because I think here in America anyway, here in the United States, we tend to accept that employers are allowed to place these delineations, like you have to work 4 weeks or this or that. And we just accept that as employees, that we don't have a choice. Perhaps she just didn't want to bother with that. And she knew that, I came to you in good faith. You bluntly said, no, I'm not dealing with you. I don't necessarily agree with what she did, but I also don't find it to be something that I would label her with any kind of ill intent. The thing I wonder about is it says her contract required 4-week notice. What kind of contract does she have after 11 years? Is this a right to work state? Like what is she, a contractor? What does that mean? And that's part of the question I had when I read this.
And you mentioned, Nora, that about her relationship with her employer. It could be that her relationship was such that she had these types of experiences, and therefore may have felt, as Robin said, that it was not going to be fruitful to continue
that's
arguing.
possible. Yeah. We don't know.
Right. Jane?
I think that's the point I'd like to pick up on. For me, that was the first point in answering the question, what might have prevented this incident bubbling into what it did, was her relationship with the employer from from the start, and in fact, what it was towards the end. And I guess the question that was coming up for me is, what had the employer not done to generate loyalty in her?
Yeah, and then if you're with a place for 11 years, on the one hand, there should be some sense of appreciation from the employers. Presumably, you're doing a reasonably good job, and they should be grateful for the contribution you've made. And why are you so quick to want to find something else after that length of time? It doesn't answer questions, but it does raise questions about the employers themselves.
No, I certainly think so. I mean, 11 years is a long enough time that it's not like she's jumping ship after 6 months or whatever. I think her desire to leave is legitimate. And I think your point, Robin, is interesting. Maybe there are cultural differences. I'm in Canada, you're in the United States. I think there's an expectation here that if you want something and your boss says no, you go to one of the other options. Maybe that you belong to a professional association. Maybe you may not want to go to a labor lawyer. That's a very big thing to do, but it was an option. I don't know if there's a union, if she has colleagues who are at more of a senior level than her who could have advised her, or the HR department. But yeah, I'm certainly not into labeling people, but her complete passivity of basically, I don't get what I want, so I'm going to do a criminal act or an unethical act, let's say.
I don't think it was unethical either. I think that
You really
definitely not. I don't think it was criminal for sure.
No, but it was unethical. And why would you say that's not unethical?
So do I think that it's ideal for her to just bail on the company? No, she probably should have just said, I'll give you 2 weeks. That's what you're going to get. If you don't like that, that's fine. So the fact that she just bailed, probably not ideal, but to label it unethical, I am not, they could fire me tomorrow and be like, you're out, goodbye. So when I was younger, I definitely had much more loyalty to organizations
Mhm.
because, oh, they hired me and I have a job and thank you. You don't see that anymore because companies aren't loyal to their employees. So I don't require employees to be loyal to horrible employers
No.
either.
No, certainly not. But if she's pretending to be working for a company,
Is
when
she
she's
though?
actually working for somebody else so that she can get her end of year bonus. He said if you leave after 2 weeks, if you're not here for the 4 weeks, you don't get your end of year bonus. So she just disappears. She doesn't formally leave. I don't know what her company comes, because again, this was a very strange scenario and that we were missing lots and lots and lots of important information. But if she hasn't officially resigned, then
After 3 days,
conceivably,
she's abandoned the job.
well, we don't know. I mean, we
No,
know
that's
that
the
she-
law. After
I think
3
that's
days, you've
likely.
abandoned a job.
Yeah,
I'm
if she
sorry, I
walks
didn't
off the
hear.
job and if she walks off the job and doesn't,
If you don't show up after 3 days, they just label you as abandoning the job and she no longer works there.
Well, again, maybe that's an American thing. It's not necessarily assumed. She could be, until something is formally closed, it's not totally closed.
Hmm.
well, let's
So-
steer this in a different direction. When the boss said when we need you for 4 weeks, let's give the employer a benefit of the doubt. Let's say
Mhm.
perhaps they're short-staffed.
Mhm.
Perhaps they can't immediately fill, they're afraid they won't be able to fill her position.
Mhm.
Does she have a response other than either I'm leaving anyway,
Mhm.
or what she did? Is there another way she could approach the boss? Or is there another way the boss could approach her at that point? Jane, we haven't heard a lot from you. You have anything to add?
Yeah, I think so. I think it just comes down to the relationship she forged with the organization. And in this case, as you say, her boss. I think what's missing is this level of conversation that could have happened. Coming back to Nora's original point around the assumptions, what might she be assuming about her own negotiation power with the new organization that was inviting her and asking her to start only within 2 weeks? That in itself, I think, is I don't know, it's unfair, but it's rather demanding. It's certainly not something that would happen, particularly in the UK. It's very familiar for us to have a 4-week notice period, and the employment law is different here. So I think that's slightly unfair pressure to put on her to turn up to a new job in just 2 weeks, and actually making her make that decision, I think is tough. But I think it comes down to the nature of the relationship and the ability of trust and mutual respect both employer and Charlotte had at this time. And I think if that relationship had been strong, they could have come to a conversation, mutually beneficial conversation, such that she could be a good leaver.
Mhm.
And I would hope being a good leaver is being responsible enough to put things into place for her team members, not to have to scrapple around, but rather there be some key things in place that they could take up, or there would be a successor or something like that. So for me, it comes down to the nature of the relationship and the conversations that they could have had. What about you, Robin? What do you think?
So I feel like absolutely there were a lot of conversations that could have been there, that could have been said, what if I give you 2 weeks and then if you have a question or whatever, you can call me, reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to be available. Like that's an option. I do agree that it's interesting that the other employer was like, I need you in 2 weeks. And then back to your point, Nora, I wonder if that job might not be available if I don't start in 2 weeks was a made up assumption or reality. We don't know the answer to that question. We have to fill in that gap.
Yeah. I mean, there are circumstances in which it could be very legitimate for the current boss to refuse to let her go quickly. For example, and again, it's a writer, like there's just so much missing here. But for example, perhaps they've been working on a project. Their company's been working on a project for 10 months. And, 3 weeks from now is the presentation to the board and something really important is going to happen, in which case that would be a legitimate thing to say, can we work it out so that you're here for that presentation and you've played the lead on for the past 6 months,
And that's a different question than if you're not here.
That's right.
XYZ risks.
No, that's right. I mean, that whole tone, that very punitive tone. And if she's been there for 11 years, we also don't know if this guy's been, or this woman has been her boss for 11 years, right?
Mhm.
It could be that this is a really punitive, tough sort of person. He could, or she could have arrived 6 months before or the week before, or been with her for 11 years, which, as some of you've pointed out, would have shaped her feeling of passivity, like I've tried and it never works with this boss, so why bother? But we don't know. I mean, so there's just a lot of guesswork about what led to this moment and to this situation.
Mhm.
Yeah, when you have a relationship where, and I mean, you should, that's what makes for a healthy workplace or a healthy relationship in any context where there is open communication. You know, if the employer would explain, you know, it would be very difficult for us to let you go early because
Mhm.
we're in a project. It's
Mhm.
hard to find replacements. We need training. We need you to replace it, and that's why it's in the contract. Right?
Mhm.
What can we do to work with you to find a way for you to accommodate your future employer
Mhm.
while still honoring what we need you to do? And Charlene could initiate that if the employer doesn't. You know, I'm happy to make myself available on weekends, after hours. I could try to work something out with the new boss to have, you know, gaps in my schedule there. And this is, when it comes to ethics, we get ourselves in so much trouble because we look at things in a binary way.
Mhm.
Well, either I need to leave at 2 weeks, or you insist I stay for 4 weeks. There are almost always some sort of compromise.
Mhm.
And here, the unwillingness of the employer to entertain that, and you know, sort of what you were talking about, Robin, that her reaction, which certainly was not ideal and quite possibly unethical because she did leave her colleagues in the lurch, but bad behavior encourages bad behavior. And when the employer starts off with an adversarial tone, that encourages an adversarial tone in the other party. And it just devolves from there.
Well, can you imagine under that circumstance if she had stayed?
Mm.
I mean, she's completely disgruntled. She's angry. You're ruining her life and you make her stay for 4 weeks. That makes no sense.
Mhm.
And we hear
It's
a lot about
interesting.
quiet quitting now. So
Yeah.
that's exactly where it comes from.
It's also interesting what you pointed out, Jane, about, you know, the strangeness of the demand that you start working for me in 2 weeks, because that struck me too, that was very, very surprising, very unusual. So what's interesting to me, looking at the whole thing as a kind of a play or a story, is that all three characters are kind of doing surprising things. I don't say that in a judgmental way, but they all surprised me. It's surprising to demand 2 weeks. It's surprising to refuse, you know, to allow her to leave. And her response was surprising. And,
You know, some of it is going to be conjecture, but you know, in America, 2 weeks notice is kind of standard.
Mhm.
And it's
I
quite
see.
possible that this other employer, they had somebody, perhaps someone had to leave suddenly, might have been illness, might have been something unforeseen, or it might just be a gap that they needed to fill quickly. And their condition was what is somewhat normal in the business world. Give people
Well, this
2
is a
weeks.
cultural difference. This is very interesting. It's a cross-national difference because in the UK and Canada, 2 weeks is completely abnormal. It's really strange. So.
I think this is a sad story because of the 10 years, 11 years with this organization, and the fact that it had to end in this way. It makes me feel that she's, what I would say, not a good leader, therefore not an advocate for this company. So they lose out in terms of, I'm sure, share her story around the punitive combat she received when she, you know, resigned. So again, for me, it comes back to the culture of the employer. How do they treat people? How do people feel that, you know, they're valued, that who they are and what they what they do matters. And that trickles all the way through the nature of the relationship, not just at the beginning or the middle, but, you know, clearly when someone's been there for a long time.
Definitely.
Yeah. Very often what people, and I mean, this has been shown in studies that what employees say they want most from a job is a boss they can trust. They want to feel appreciated. They want to be able to be loyal. And they want continuity. They want a sense that I'm part of something that's larger than myself. And yet there I saw a Harvard Business Review report that said 58% of employees say that they would trust a total stranger more than they trust their own boss.
That's very sad.
It is extremely sad. And this is why it happens. Now, the person who told me this story, so there was a little information missing, the person who told me this story worked in the same office when this happened. And then the person who told me the story subsequently got a job in another place and gave her notice. And her boss was, "Why are you leaving?" And she didn't really feel compelled to give her full answer, which is, you try to squeeze every drop out of me. You don't show appreciation. You don't demonstrate that I'm a member of the team. Why would you expect loyalty from me? Why would I be compelled to see this as anything more than just a paycheck?
You see, that's beautiful the way you put it, because again, I'm a writer. So the narrative that we got was basically from an employee whose attitude towards the boss comes through in the telling of the story as just flatly refused, you know, with no explanation. And that certainly, from the teller's point of view, completely accurate, and especially given what you say about this person's subsequent experience, it sounds very accurate. So we were given a lot of information without detail, but we could feel it in the tone of the scenario. Yeah, very interesting.
I think that a lot of employers in the US wrongly still believe that they have the power and that they can treat people this way. And they're finding that that's not as true as it used to be. People aren't loyal in that way. And it's not seen as bad if you job hop every couple of years. That's not seen as bad anymore. And so I think employers need to start shifting their expectation.
I agree, Robin. And I think the pandemic has really amplified that. You know, I think it's showing, revealing to the future of work that's, you know, still being realized, and that people are being attracted by bigger bonuses, more flexible working arrangements, as Charlene was, better benefits. Who knows what that might have been for her to work from home, and she might have had situations and outside of work that she needed to attend to. So the whole package was, you know, way more appealing to her, for her to make this need to leave and the way that she did.
Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end of the first segment. I'd like to ask each of you to sort of sum up your final thoughts. And when we finish this segment, go to the next segment, one of the topics I'd like us to take up there is, well, we're talking about I mean, Robin, you just articulated it, that employers have to go farther to make the workplace one where employees will want to work. We sort of get into a tug of war there, that sometimes what's best for the worker is not what's best for the company, and vice versa. And ideally, we'd like to find a way of having it be the best of both worlds. But when that doesn't work, how do we go about addressing it? So I mean, we'll get into that more later. But if you could take a minute or so and give us your final thoughts. Jane, you want to get started?
Sure. I think for me, this boils down to the nature of relationship. The relationship Charlene had with her boss, and on the back of that relationship, the conversations that were missing and that could have eradicated this situation. Her having being able to test out the assumptions either from the new employer or indeed her current employer. But for me, in being at work and working with others and organizations is founded upon our relationships. And if those aren't strong or they're not in a healthy way, then these are the sad unethical situations, if you perceive it to be unethical, that it can lead to. So for me, it's about building relationships built upon trust and enabling employees, team members to have conversations in a way that's, in service of others and morally upheld.
Very good. Robin, you want to go next?
Yeah, it's interesting to me that, so I work with very high level executives, founders, CEOs, and in this situation, I find myself siding, if there is a side, with the employee and saying, as a leader, if I were working with her CEO, I would say it is your responsibility to have created an environment where she felt safe and confident and willing to meet you at your contract. And if you didn't create that, that's your fault. So it's interesting that I tend to side with the employee in this, and that if they flat refused her, do I think she should have given them 2 weeks? Yes. Do I begrudge her the fact that she didn't give them 4? Not at all.
It's interesting you talk about taking sides. I think, Robin, the way the scenario was framed, one is it's almost inevitable to reach that conclusion because it's, the big bad wolf of an employer and then this, helpless person who does the only thing she could possibly do. I obviously, and I was going to say, obviously, there's a certain culture in that workplace, but one can't even assume that from the information we have, which is very limited. All you can assume is what's written in the scenario, which is that this person refused her. So, yeah, it seems this employer was very inflexible, and it seems that she wasn't someone who could exercise the various options that could have been available to her in this situation. There were all sorts of alternatives she had that she didn't consider that I think would have been much more appropriate in this circumstance.
And I think that really goes back to the point that we've been making, that, and I agree with you, Nora, that her reaction is not what it should have been. But I agree with you, Robin, that it's ultimately the employer's fault for not creating a relationship of trust. And we use the term toxic workplace a lot. And I think that's exactly what that means. What is toxic? It means that there's a poison that spreads and affects or infects others. And so if I'm a boss and I don't treat my people in a way that they feel is fair and respectful, then they're going to very easily rationalize not conducting themselves in a way that is upright and respectful. Culture always starts with leadership. And when there's a failure, I think it has to go back to the leaders. Now, it doesn't excuse, I don't think, what Charlene did. But I think that if she would have had a little more motivation to find another way of handling the situation, it would have been much less likely that she would have acted that way.
And she could have told the new employee, employer, I have a responsibility. Can we work with that? And that would have been easy. But she had no motivation to do that.
All right. Well, thank you, ladies. This has been a particularly interesting conversation. So we're going to end the segment here. If you are in the listening audience or the watching audience, and you have a scenario that you'd like us to take up, please go to my website, jonasandgoldson.com, and use the contact information there to submit your suggestion. If it's compelling, we definitely will take it up in a future episode. If you are a Grappling with the Gray member, please use the community link to join us for these open forum in the second section. If you're not a member, please go to gwtg.live, where you can get a free 30-day trial and enjoy member benefits. Thank you again to Jane Adset Grant, Nora Gold, and Dr. Robin for being part of this episode of Grappling with the Gray.